Good morning, all, and thank you for joining today's workshop. Thank you for the speakers and all attendees. I'm Louise van Erve. I'm part of the data.europa.eu team working on all communication and academy activities, where this workshop is one of them. In this workshop, we will guide you through how to use open data for your research, which we will look into Data.europa, but also great examples from experts from universities telling how they did use open data for research and academic purpose. And then we will have a short practice, like a case where you can practice with it as well for yourself, not with scores, but just for yourself to practice. And you can directly ask your questions to our experts. So thank you for joining and being here today. First of all, the rules of, let's say, the game or the workshop today. It will be recorded. The recording will be shared afterwards on our YouTube channel, which is the Publications Office of the AU. And you can look it back here if you want to see something or hear something and you want to see it again. I would like to ask you if you could please reserve like 3 minutes after the workshop to help us further improve it. This workshop is the first in a series of workshops on how to use open data for your research, and we're happy to hear your feedback so that we can further improve this kind of workshops. And then for questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. I will look in the chat if there are questions. In the end, we have a Q&A where we'll ask them to the experts, but also they can be answered during the workshop in the chat. So these are the rules, but more important, as I said, I'm not alone here. I have experts joining me. First, there's Leon. Leon Mook. He's a consultant in the data strategy and factory team of Capgemini Invent with a focus on data science and data strategy. A typical project for him will include linking current data science initiatives to strategic business goals, identifying promising data science use cases, and developing proof of concept for those use cases. And currently is on a project identifying opportunities in data migration and helping them taking the first steps on generative AI. Then we have Diewertje Bloemen joining us today. Currently works at KU of Leuven, where she helped to launch the institutional data repository in early 2022 as the repository's product manager. On top of that, she's also the technical product manager of KU Leuven's literature repository and is one of the fifth RDM Competence Center at the university, where her field of expertise is data sharing and the use of data repositories. And she will share her experiences from KU Leuven today. Then Leon van Wisse works in the humanities labs of the University of Amsterdam as data engineer in cultural data collection and linking at the UvA's Data Science Center. He models and publishes datasets as linked open data and contributes to the development of research infrastructures such as Globalize Project and the Amsterdam Time Machine. Over the last year, his engagement with cultural heritage resulted in successful collaborations with the UvA's University Library and the Amsterdam City Archives to make research data more sustainable. And he will tell us more about this in his presentation during the workshop. And then Maria Pia Di Buono received her PhD in communication sciences with a thesis in computational linguistics at the University of Salerno and is currently an assistant professor of modern language teaching at the University of Naples L'Orientale, where she teaches translation studies and digital humanities. She was a postdoc researcher at international universities and excellence centers and took part in several national and international research projects. So these are today's speakers with quite an impressive experience, and I'm interested to see their presentation, and I hope you are too. Today's agenda, we have quite a packed agenda, so this was the short introduction. Then I will introduce you into data.europa.eu, who we are and what you can find on the website. And then I will leave the floor to Diewertje, who will tell us more about data publication and reuse. Then Leon will share his experience with cinema context in linked data-driven research. And following that, Maria will show us more about how to go from data to knowledge, show examples of real-world applications with open data. We have a short break then to clear our heads, and then we go to the case with open data. It's just an open case for you to practice, not with scores or stuff like but really for you to practice the skills and to see how you can use open data for research, and you can directly ask your questions if you have them. And then we will wrap up, and there's all time for you to ask your questions. Or if there were questions during the workshop in the chat, then we can ask them to the experts. So this is today's agenda. Let's move on to the first, which is what is data.europa.eu? How to use data.europa.eu? Well, first of all, data.europa.eu is a platform providing central point of access to open data from international European Union, but also national, regional, local, and geodata portals. So covering a lot of open data sets, more than 1.5 million data sets are already on the portal, and we keep on improving and publishing data on this portal. And it's open, which means that it's freely accessed and used and reused and shared by anyone for any purpose. So this can be commercial, but non-commercial, and also then academic and research purpose. And this has been set up well from a legal basis. So the DGA, the Data Governance Act, but also the Data Act, which has been set up by the European Commission to implement in the EU and for EU institutions, but also EU member states. So they needed to implement this regulations, which means that there needs to be a platform where all this open data can be found, and this is the data.europa.eu. So it's for EU institutions and agencies, but also European countries coming together, publishing their open data on the data.europa.eu portal. So it's really a place where data providers, which are the people publishing data on the portal, and the data users, which can be anyone, so developers, researchers, academics, anyone can use the data. So it's a bridge even between them. So the providers, as I said, are institutions, geoportals, European countries, local, national, regional institutions publishing their data, but also from data, from geoportals, as I said, for space data or maps or stuff like that. So you can all find it on the portal. And then the goal of the portal is to increase transparency because we have so much data, but to increase transparency that we can all access the data, improve open data access, make it easy to gather this data, to get to this data set, instead of having to ask for permission to get it or needing to find it. You can find it all on this portal. And boosting also the reuse of this data to see what we can do with all this information and how we can use it for different purposes. You can find this all on our website, which is data.europa.eu. But besides the data and the portal that we have there, we have lots of other services as well. We also have an academy because then we have the data, but how to use the data, data quality, data visualization, stuff like that. You can all learn about this in the academy. There are over 200 lessons covered in 11 courses with e-learnings, readings, all of that for you to learn more about data skills and to improve your data skills. Then we also build on a community, like it's open data community, where we organize this kind of webinars and workshops, but we also communicate via social media. We have a newsletter where we gather what has been going on in the open data community. We write weekly news pieces where you read the latest news in the open data community. Data stories, if you want to have more like a practical example of how you can use data sets, it's all covered in data stories. And we have a podcast coming up with more information on open data and more general topics there. So actually a lot of things to, if you want to learn more about open data and what's going on in the open data world. And then last of that, we also have publications, reports, studies on open data community, but also the open data maturity, where we measure the open data maturity of EU member states. So how mature are they with their policy impact, and 4 dimensions actually. We also have a lot of webinars on that, which the recordings are on YouTube as well, if you want to have more information on this report. But then for today, we're here to discuss, well, to see how you can use data.europa in the portal. So quickly, this is the website. When you search for the website, you'll see this page. And then if you want to go to the data sets, and if you want to find the data sets to use, you can go to data and then to quick search. And there, well, you see it already. Over 1.5 million data sets are on there. Just to look to, yeah, you can take a look and see it for yourself, but it's quite a lot. But there we have, of course, the search function, and we have the filtering options for you to, if you want to search for a specific data set, you can find for publisher, so the institution or the national agency who published it, the format you want to have your data set in, but also the catalog it comes from, or a specific category. So actually, as you see here, quite a lot of filtering options to search for the data sets that you are looking for. So this is quickly how you can use the portal and how you can search for data sets on the portal. If you want to do your research, or if you need the data sets, then you can find them all here. And last, quickly, if you want to learn more, as I said before, we have the Data.europa Academy to improve your data literacy skills. So if you know where to find the data sets on the portal, then how to use these data sets, there you can learn more about with the Data.europa Academy. So a lot of information can be found on there as well. So this was a quick introduction into Data.europa, who we are, what we do. It's quite a lot. Feel free to ask your questions. But I would like to hand over the floor to Diewertje, who can tell you more about data publication and data reuse.
So yeah, I'm Diewertje Bloemen, and I currently don't have access to controlling the slides. So I'll wait until I have that. Yeah, great. So as Louise has already said, I'm from the KU Leuven, and today I'm really going to be talking about the very practical side of data publication and reuse. A little bit more about KU Leuven and what I do. So Louise mentioned that I'm the product manager of the Institutional Research Data Repository, which we call RADAR, but written as RDR. And it's really the repository for the publication of finished research data as part of the KU Leuven RDM infrastructure and data lifecycle. And it's a tool for the fair publication of research data produced by KU Leuven researchers and research. I think it's important to know that about an institutional repository. If your institute has one, it's typically only limited to publications by researchers of the institution. So for example, other researchers can't publish in our repository. They can access data that has been published there though. And it is managed by the department that I'm also a part of, which is LIBIS, which is part of the KU Leuven libraries. So today I'm going to be talking about what data publication is, how you can find data to reuse, and then sort of what to look out for when you're actually going to be reusing that data that you found. So a bit more about data publication to sort of give the context as to how the data actually gets out there and why people publish data, because it's becoming such a normal thing in research, but there is still a lot of questions about why you should do it. That's going to be what we're talking about right now. So what is data publication, also sometimes called data sharing? It's sharing your research data typically after a research project ends, and we say at minimum, the principle is to at minimum share the data that is necessary to replicate your research, but that's really the minimum. You can also publish data to support a publication, so it's not only after a research project that it's possible to share your data, or you can publish data as a standalone research output. You can share your data in a bunch of different platforms, dependent on the policy of your university or institution. You're going to have a different order of these. Typically, the top two might be reversed. If you have an institutional repository, it's typically advised to publish your data there. But sometimes the advice is actually to first look for domain-specific repositories. Now, what is all the difference between these three types of repositories? An institutional repository, it's limited to data produced by research at the specific university the repository is from, while a domain-specific repository tries to sort of group data together by topic. And I think Data.europa is kind of a unique example in that as well, that it really collects metadata and data from data that has been published that all relate to data from international, European Union, national, regional, local, and geodata portals. So it's not all the data that is out there, but it's a really interesting subset to focus on. And that's also where you can publish data related to that branch of the world, kind of. So domain-specific repositories are really interested if there is one for your domain, but you also have generalist data repositories, which are very broad in scope and everyone can publish data there. The one thing that you should know about a repository is that it's going to help you make your data fair. FAIR is the acronym for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it's sort of the principles behind good research data management. And like we all know, open science, fair data is sort of the part of open science that is about data. Why do we not talk about open data, but rather fair data? Because sometimes there are legitimate reasons not to make your data openly available, but that doesn't mean that they can't be fair. An example of how you can make your data fair is by actually publishing your data in a repository, because most trusted repositories are what we call fair enabling. They have all the elements in place that will make the data fair for you. I have used the example of our institutional repository here to sort of point out a couple of elements to really look for if you're trying to find a fair enabling repository. So for the findability, it's really good to have a persistent identifier, typically in the form of a DOI, but it also can be a different type of identifier. To have structured and machine-readable metadata. So that means that it uses international standards for the metadata formatting. And it's also a bonus if there is file structuring, especially if you have data sets with a lot of files. And it's really nice that you don't have to just scroll through an endless flat list, but rather that you can sort of go through them folder by folder. Then the accessibility has helped a lot because a repository in principle always has an open download infrastructure, which means that you don't have to pay a subscription fee to access the openly available data, like some are used to when accessing journal articles, for example. It's also advised to always use open or preferred file formats to ensure that the files themselves are as accessible as possible, especially if you're using instruments to really make sure that others can open it without needing to buy the instrument. That's also an important factor in interoperability. I think it's also important to note with this letter in specific for the acronym is that FAIR is something you try to get to. You try to make your data as fair as possible, but making your data 100% fair is really difficult. And actually, I think the interoperability part is the one thing that is almost impossible to get 100% interoperable. But that's, again, not the goal. The goal is to make your data as fair as possible. But you can improve the interoperability by using the right file formats, by making sure that there is metadata that provide context, and to make sure that there is documentation so that you can describe the tools that were used to generate or to process the data. The reusability is really important because if you publish your data, you also want to make sure that your data is reusable. And one of the most important parts of that is license information. You need to know what you can do with the data, and that's encapsulated in the license of the data set. Again, the documentation also helps a lot because it provides that context, just like the metadata does. And versioning is really important to ensure that if you access the data at a certain point in time, that you can always refer to how the data was at that exact point. Even though they might have added data later on, you can still go back to that version that you used. So that's sort of an example of how a repository is fair enabling. And then specifically on the dataset level, the four main factors you always need to look out for, and that you're also going to notice if you're accessing data online, is that each dataset should have a persistent identifier, can be a DOI or something else, should have standardized metadata according to an international standard, should have license or terms of use information. Note that this can be on the dataset level or on the repository or platforms level. So sometimes the repository will say all datasets published on this platform have the CC0 license. That's also fine. Most of the time you'll find it though on an individual dataset level. And of course, to actually be able to see the files and the documentation that are part of the dataset. So these four elements are really the key elements of what a published data set is. Now, a question we get quite a lot at the university by our researchers is, well, it sounds nice, but why would I put in the effort to publish my data when I am already done with my data? Well, that's what this slide is about, so that you can also understand why people have actually made their data available. For one, it's kind of obligated by a lot of funders nowadays, for example, by Horizon Europe grants, but it's also just a good practice because it makes your research verifiable and replicable. On top of that, which is sort of a very personal bonus just for the researcher, is that it increases the reach and impact of your entire research project, because a data set is its own citable research output, but it has also been shown that articles that link to data in a repository have up to 25% higher citation impact. And then sort of a moral reason to do it is that it lowers the cost of future research because there is possible reuse. Now that you kind of know how data ends up in a repository, the next step is to actually find the data, because it can be in a repository, but like I showed, there are a bunch of types of repositories and then a bunch of repositories within each type. So it can be quite difficult, but there are aggregators and larger platforms out there that are really good examples on how to find your data more easily, and data.europa is one of those examples. Data.europa is searchable, like Louisa just says, 1.5 million data sets that you can query through and try to find something that you want to do research on. And it actually contains the metadata and the data on data from international, European Union, national, regional, local, and geo data portal data. But you can also look at aggregators like OpenAir and DataSite Commons. What they do specifically is they go out to all the repositories, or most of the repositories that are out there, and they harvest metadata, which means that they have this catalog of information on datasets that are out there. Another option is to also go to the repositories themselves straight away. I personally wouldn't advise you to do that, because you're probably going to miss out on relevant data, because the repository only has the stuff that is in it searchable. It is useful if you have a very specific topic and you know the researcher that you want the data from, to maybe then go to the institutional repository, or to go to the domain-specific repository if you have a very specific topic. But in general, it's best to use aggregators like data.europa, OpenAir, or DataSite Commons to really make sure that your scope is as wide as possible. Once you have found your data, you're going to want to access it, but it's going to be a case-by-case evaluation on how you do it, because each platform is different. For example, in data.europa, the files are actually accessible from the portal straight away, while from an OpenAir, you first have to go via a link to the repository to then figure out how to download your data there. So that's really the first thing, like, where's the access point? Is it in the portal itself that you found the data in, or are you going to have to be redirected to somewhere else? Most of the time, the data is openly available, so you can download it straight away. But sometimes it's not, because it is restricted due to reasons like privacy or intellectual property rights. And then you might have to send in an access request to actually be able to get access to the data. Now, before you access the data set in any kind of way, it's really important to read the terms of use and the licensing information, because they define the rules that you have to stick to when you are actually using and accessing the data. An example of what a dataset looks like can be found in the link that is now just dropped in the chat as well, where you can kind of scroll through and you can see those elements that I previously talked about with the metadata, the DOI, the information on licensing, and the versioning tab, where it tracks the versions of a dataset. But this can look different dependent on the platform where you found the data. Now that you've actually found the data, you've accessed it, there are a couple of things that you really need to pay attention to when you're actually going to be reusing that data for your research. The first thing to avoid is unlawful reuse. That sounds really scary, but it's very simple to avoid. And again, it's about reading and understanding the license that is applicable to the data or the terms of use. note that if there is no license, then you're not allowed to do anything with the data. You're not even allowed to access it. So you're not even allowed to download it. Make sure that you know what the license is and that there is a license before you do anything. If you had to request access, then there's a good chance that there isn't a license set in stone, but rather that you're going to have to sign a data transfer agreement, which is basically a contract that stipulates the rules under which you are allowed to use the data and then gives you access to the data as well. Make sure, if you have signed a data transfer agreement, that it always remains with the data, because it's going to make it really a lot easier to keep track of what the rules exactly were in those agreements. And be careful when you share internal access to data that they all know what the rules are. But typically within your data transfer agreement, it's stated that you're not allowed to share your data with anyone else. That includes colleagues within your institution. So be very mindful of that. So what you can then do is to download the data. A tip is to always export and save the metadata alongside the files, including version and license information. And something that's typically not part of the metadata export is the accessed data. So the date at which you have actually downloaded the data. It's going to be really useful for yourself when you're later on going to refer to the data that you have that date. And ensure that if you share the data internally with your colleagues or research partners, that they also adhere to the lawful reuse by making sure that they're aware of the stipulations that come along with the license. So make sure that you have that extra documentation to go along with the downloaded data to make that a lot easier over time. Once you have actually downloaded data, you've used it for your research, it can be that you're going to end up with a data set at the end of your research that is derived from that data, or maybe you've generated entirely new data. Both can be published. But when you're publishing your data, if you have reused previously published data, make sure that you avoid data duplication, refer instead to the pre-existing data where possible. And again, use trusted repositories or platforms where you can, and always make sure to refer and cite the original data set if reused in any way. Even if the license doesn't say you're obligated to do it, it is a good practice, just like you do in a research article. And then it's just a matter of making sure that you've at least shared the minimum that is necessary to replicate your research, that you've checked that there are no restrictions on sharing your data, for example, that there's no privacy sensitive information in there. And if there is, make sure to protect your data by anonymization or pseudonymization, or by restricting the access to your data, and by publishing it in a trusted research data repository. You're also going to be making your data as fair as possible if you follow everything I've said so far. So yeah, that was my part. I'm going to now give the floor back to Louisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou, for a very interesting presentation. I see some questions already in the chat. Feel free to answer them, and otherwise we'll answer them in the Q&A. I will now give the floor to Leon van Wissen.
Thanks. Great presentation. I'm going to give a more practical insight in this fair data making. At least that's what we try to do in the construction of Cinema Context. That's the data set we manage at the University of Amsterdam, a data set on cinema and cinema history. And maybe you can hear the Zuiderkerk. I'm sitting in the center of Amsterdam right now, so please bear the noise. And we did our best in making this data set as fair as possible. I'm going to tell about, let's skip the introduction now, the data set itself, how we converted it to a more open format using linked open data, show an example of how we link this data set to other data sets, and then finally how this data set or this linkable data set is used in research and education. So first, the data set itself. Cinema Context, cinemacontext.nl is the website, is an encyclopedia of Dutch film culture. We try to capture all the building blocks that are necessary to do research into the DNA of Dutch film culture. This is part of the so-called new cinema history movement in academia that sees this movie going as a social and cultural phenomenon. So it's much more than just looking at the film alone, but looking at the persons who were watching the films, the audience, or the theaters and their owners, the organizations that were behind what was screened in the Netherlands for the past 126 years. That's how far this data sets go back. So cinema context captures much more than just the film. And maybe we're not that good in describing the film because film archives are way more, have way more information on doing so. But we capture information on the venues, so the film theaters or the other venues that show film. The screenings, which individual movie is screened or in combination with other films in a series. The persons that were involved in the screening process, either as organization that was the owner of this theater or the director or other roles. And in doing so, we also try to at least make every of these entities linked to an external data set. And in most of the cases for the film, that's the IMDb. So we include the IMDb link for film, but maybe Wikidata identifiers for other entities. It will become more clear in my slides after. And the website surely looks as if nothing changed in the last 20 years. Well, maybe that's correct, but certainly not on the back end. We're continuously adding new data to our dataset. And one way to do that is by looking at the archives. A great source in the Netherlands is delver.nl, initiative of the Royal Library in The Hague, that are digitizing newspapers and magazines. And in these newspapers, you often could find these film ladders, an agenda of what was showing in cinema in a particular town for 1 week. The example on this slide is from the 80s, and this was in a crowdsourcing initiative in Rotterdam. People cut out the film ladder and individually entered the screenings of a particular film. And the thing I cut out and circled in red, we can see that Casablanca was shown, a film by Michael Curtiz, on the Sunday in a theater. This is information we can add to our data sets. Our data set that is predominantly about screenings and screening events of film. Of course, you can also automate this. If you have computer vision techniques, you can maybe select this film ladder yourself automatically and use a combination of natural language processing, OCR, and named entity recognition to also get out this information and put it in your data set. And it's quite a lot, a couple of million entries. So we have a traditional backend. This cinema context is stored in a MySQL database, and it's deposited at the archive institution in the Netherlands, DANS, one of their dataverses. So you can already access this data set, but that's a MySQL database with R table structure. So we got a grant some years ago to convert this traditional data set to a more open format, the linked open data in the resource description format, RDF. And on this slide, it's a lot. I try to make a model of all the classes and the relations that we took from the schema.org vocabulary, a vocabulary that is used on the internet, among others by Google, to make your search results pop up in Google and fill these info boxes. I'll have an example later on. And this is one of the ways to fill in this FAIR requirements, to make your data more interoperable, for instance, because the definitions are baked into the schema.org model. What is a film, or what is a movie in this case? A schema.org movie or a schema.org screening event. And the idea of linked open data is that everything is linkable and everything can link to each other. The building blocks of this linked open data are URLs or URIs, unique identifiers that have the form of a web address, which means, in theory, that you can click on it and get insightful information about the thing that you're trying to get information on in your dataset. We already had those URIs in our dataset, the permalinks, the permanent URLs, and we use those as URIs. So in any case, if you click the example over here, you would end up on a website and get a bit more human readable information. But if a machine goes to there, it will understand the data as it gets it in this RDF format. Which is great also for linking to external datasets if they use the same data structure. A small example, but I can everyone strongly advise to take a look, if you're not familiar with this, at the Wikidata Sparkle workshop or course. This is an example from Wikidata, the structured backend of Wikipedia, that also has their data in this structured RDF format. Everything is entered in a so-called triple. That's a statement. And everything is represented by these web addresses. So we can say that a film is of a type film, with a definition, of course, behind this film. That film has a title, say Casablanca. The film is directed by Michael Curtiz, also represented by a URI with a name and a birthplace and so on. These two examples below, Q132689 is the unique identifier in Wikidata of Casablanca. This is very brief, but take a look at the Sparkle course by Wikidata. It's a nice entry point into the world of linked data and Sparkle. Sparkle being the query language to get access to these linked open datasets. Already said, the schema.org vocabulary is very useful. It was designed by, among others, Google to make the web more searchable. Well, that's exactly what is used. This linked data is used to fill these info boxes. This comes from the local knowledge graph of Google, but for sure this is derived from IMDb and Wikidata. And in theory, what our Cinema Context database can add to this is information on the individual screenings over the years. We have the information where a movie was screened, which is not in the film archives and not on Wikidata. And maybe Wikidata is also not the place for this. We don't want to pollute Wikidata with these millions of screening events. That's why we have a specialized data set like Cinema Context. I already saw a question. Is there a Sparkle endpoint? Yes. Since a year, I'm very glad that the university library of my university saw that we needed a place for this research data. We didn't have a place to store the linked data yet. There are no country-wide repositories for this to keep this data alive. But they have their linked open data platform, and they opened it up and included Cinema Context as one of their datasets. So yes, over here you can find a Sparkle endpoint to this first linked open data version of Cinema Context. So that's the dataset on its own in a more linkable format. But let's see if we can link it to other datasets besides this IMDb. And IMDb is not publishing their data as linked open data yet. It's Amazon. A bit more complicated if you want to get access to that information. Wikidata is. We do link Wikidata links to us. And in the future, we'll add a link back. But as part of a little hackathon we did during Corona at home, we took another dataset from the Royal Library, a dataset with posters, film posters of the Film Museum here in Amsterdam. This was very well scrapable. And I think the license permitted that we did so, but we're not storing any of the data, we just store the metadata, and we link back to the archives itself. We took it from the memory, the history of the Netherlands, and there was a poster collection of film posters. And all we had to do is link the metadata with the title of these film posters to a unique URI, this URL of Cinema Context. And then we could say that we had a film, and this dataset had a film poster. It was nice to give an image for one of the films. How we did this is documented on our website if you want to know more, including the code and the data itself. So if you just take a look at this dataset, the poster dataset, you can write a Sparkle query, because we transformed this into linked open data as well, and get all the film posters together with their title and maybe a link to Cinema Context in one overview. But then we replicated what the memory already did in that platform. So it's nicer to combine the two datasets. For instance, using the screening data of Cinema Context, we know when films were screened on a particular time, on a particular cinema, in a particular city. So we had the idea, let's create a virtual poster wall. So say virtually you're in a city at some point. Can I see from the film posters that you would see glued to the wall what was being screened at a particular week? Well, this website, I think it's still online, the Plakmuur. You can select a week or a cinema, or you can leave something open and just select a year. And you get all the posters fed from the information from Cinema Context on what was screened in a particular week. Nice example of how to easily link two datasets together. And finally, my last part of the presentation. These two data sets and many more, if you just link to it, will become the basis, I hope, as a data engineer for a new way of doing research or education, a more data-driven way of doing your research. And it's increasingly more common, indeed, it was already said by Diebertje, that you deposit your data and write a paper and then link back to your data publication. These data publications indeed deserve their own unique identifiers. They are a publication in itself. So most often you see these data stories, a practical insight in how your data was collected for your research, or you can use this for your thesis. And this is your justification of what you based your interpretation on, the way you selected your data, you wrangled your data, transformed it, you wrote queries, analyses, a combination of data, and maybe visualize this in a table or another graph. You can do this in several ways, but the idea is that you combine this narrative, explaining what you do, with the code that really does it in any programming language, Python or Sparkle or any others, and then show these results in a visualization. Nowadays, in the digital humanities, this is really getting more popular, and I think it also improves digital literacy, because maybe people are all of a sudden able to change a little thing, a variable in one of your code blocks and get information on another city, for instance. 3 examples of these data stories that we all used in this project. There's a markdown version, just plain text, or the thing that is used on GitHub, for instance, where you can make your static website so that it will be there for many years. But this is static, and you can only see it. There's no interactive element in there. Maybe some of you are familiar with the Jupyter notebooks. Also a way with this narrative and combining code with results. You can very well also do that on these open endpoints with Sparkle endpoints. But I'm going to show some other results, some other data stories that are part of this platform that our university library uses, the DB platform, that has these data stories built in using Sparkle. And I'm afraid that these data stories are also there on the link that was just shared. So just go to stories, and you can see 2 examples of this data set. And these are examples from these 2 data stories. On the left, the moving image has not survived the click meeting platform, I'm afraid. But on the right, you see the Sparkle query that makes this. The idea is that you can type in the name of a film, the name of a city, and get presented results in a table. Or, I'm sorry, that you here type in the name of a city and see the distribution of foreign films, films that were produced outside of the Netherlands, and local films. Another way to visualize your material. And then finally, back to these posters example, type in the name of a city, and you get presented a list of film posters based on the films that were screened in that city for the years. I can type in the link to the notebook in the chat. But this was my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions later on.
Yes, thank you, Leuven, for this very interesting example and presentation. And indeed, if you link to the chat, the attendees can also see the examples you mentioned. And I would like to pass the floor to Maria.
Okay, hi everyone. So today I will talk about data and knowledge, and I will explain some of the strategies that we use in research and real-world applications. Just a few words about me. As Luis said, I'm a researcher at the University of Naples Orientale, and I work in natural language processing and language technologies, including machine translation technologies. I will present 2 use cases today, and I chose these ones because actually they are different in the results that we provided, because one is a user-render application, and another one is a dataset, a resource that we can use in research, but they use the same data, open data, as input. These data are taken from the Europeana web portal, Europeana is a foundation and also an initiative to share cultural heritage information about Europe. It's really a huge data set where a lot of providers are sharing their data about cultural heritage as open data. So it's really an important resource. And I will present these two use cases. The first one is across Europe with Maggie, and the other one is NEAT, named entities in archaeological texts. So, what about the first one? This is a proposal, a proof of concept that we submitted to the EU Datathon in 2022 at the Challenge 4, a Europe Fit for the Digital Age. And we scored the third place. Actually, Maggie did. Maggie is our virtual assistant and is a chatbot that can help users in discovering cultural heritage around Europe. It's based on a dialogue system, and we can see that Paul, our user here, is asking Maggie which paintings by Tiziano he can find in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. And Maggie is replying, providing content, replying the question, providing titles of paintings by Tiziano, and also asking if Paul wants to know more about these paintings. So Maggie has a lot of features. It allows several type of accesses. We have a standard access so that the user can just type a keyword and run a query, a keyword-based query. Then the users can register and create a profile so that they can specify which are their interests, so that Maggie can actually recommend content about regarding their interests. And then we have also location-based access so that the users can see on a map which are the cultural heritage items and points of interest that are around them. All these type of accesses actually lead to the dialogue interaction where users can use natural language to ask Maggie information about items and retrieving content. The other application, actually this one is a downstream, is a resource for a downstream task in natural language processing, is a data set named entities in archaeological texts. And we also submit this for another challenge, that is the Europeana Tech Challenge for Europeana Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning datasets. And we also won a prize for this proposal together with two other participants in the challenge. NEAT is a dataset, so it's quite different from Maggie, across Europe with Maggie, is a dataset for name identity recognition and term extraction in Italian and English. So it's really a specific resource that we develop for training machine learning algorithms and artificial intelligence applications. If you don't know, all these applications, machine learning applications and artificial intelligence applications, most of the times need data to be trained. And not always these data are available, mainly for some languages and for some domains. So this is why the reason for developing a resource like this. And how we develop this? We use the same data that we use for developing Maggie. These are the Europeana open data. And in this case, we use just a subset for the, from the archaeological collection. And we enrich this data with external vocabularies and models. These are the Getty Architecture Thesaurus and the CDOC Conceptual Reference Model, that is a model used to describe items in cultural heritage. So NEAT is composed by more than 40,000 entities, almost 8,000 unique entities, and they are classified according to these classes like period or actor, appellation, and so on. So what about the strategies? We Probably I'm saying something that my colleagues already said about the strategies that we have to use when we are dealing with open data. These are for using or reusing, enriching, developing, and sharing. So what about reuse? First of all, we have to collect data, and data collection can happen from several sources. This was the case for Maggie and for NEAT as well. We use data from other sources and we put everything together to create more knowledge to enrich this data, but we will see how. We clean the data. This is an important step because you have to consider that most of the times data are not clean. They can be noisy. There can be duplicates, and we have to consider that we want clean data without any noise. And then we have to normalize the data. This is also very important because you have to consider for Europeana data, this is true, but also for other open data, that when you have different providers, these providers can be not consistent in the data description, or they can use the model in different ways. So there is always a moment in which you have to formalize the data. But in general, what you need is knowing very well your data. How to find this data, consider that also national institutions are sharing the data as open data. What you want to clean, I mean, if there are errors or noise, what are the errors and the noise and so on, and also the normalization. So, and then you can enrich this data. And we did this through a three-step procedure. We integrate data from several sources, we align and harmonize this data, and we link the data. Why we, as I said, we need more information. For example, when a user is asking Maggie more information about Tiziano, and we need something like when he was born and so on, information like this, we can retrieve this information from external sources. Or for example, for NEAT, we integrated the information from the Getty Thesaurus. And so we identify some other sources of information useful for our applications. And then we work on the alignment and harmonization. The reason for this is that data usually use different schemas to describe the information. For example, in our case, Europeana collections are formalized through the Europeana data model, and the Getty Thesaurus is formalized through a hierarchy classification, which means that on one side we have more complex relations that are described in the Europeana data model, and on the other side we have just these taxonomic relations. So what we needed was the alignment, the harmonization. You can see on the right on this slide the information about this alignment between the Europeana data model and the Getty Thesaurus. And also we need to link information with other information external from other knowledge bases like Wikipedia, for example. Okay, then there is the developing phase in which you have to define your output. For us, it was different because Maggie was an end user's application, so we need to be very careful imagining which type of interaction the user wants or something like that. And for me, it was different because the output was something like a resource for a downstream task. So we think about other aspects that were important. Of course, you have to test and validate your data, the results of your output, and also think about the visualization process. For Maggie, it was very complex because we were thinking about a mobile application. So we were thinking how we can show display pictures of paintings on a mobile phone where the screen is very small. And for me, it was different because users that are using need are mainly researchers, so they don't need to visualize the data, but they need to find other information like part of speech tagging or bio tagging for recognizing multi-word expressions and so on. And then the last part that is about sharing. We talked already about sharing, and so which is very important in sharing is metadata enrichment. Providing metadata with your for your data is very important because you have to allow people to find your data. And if you are providing lazy metadata, of course your resource is not that findable. And of course, the documentation in which you have to explain which type of data did you use, what you did with this data, if you enriched the data, which type of model you use, and so on. And also specify the license, of course, so that people know what they can do with this resource and publish this resource. It's not that, let's say, easy because usually researchers tend to publish their resource on universities servers, or they are creating these data silos effect in which we have a lot of resources but they are not findable, they are not published. And also you have to maintain your resources because in some cases, the resources are related to a specific project, and when the project ends, people tend to forget about resources, but it's very important that these resources are always maintained. For example, we ran a survey a few years ago about linguistic linked open data, and we discovered that actually what was preventing people from using this data was the lack of metadata, which means that the data were not easily retrievable, the fact that often links are broken, which means that resources are not maintained anymore, and also the missing documentation, because people want to know what they can do, of course, with the data. Okay, so, and that's it from my side.
Yes. Thank you, Maria. Great presentation and great to see how you worked with open data. I see for now that there are no questions in the chat, but if you have any questions coming up, feel free to ask them. We are still here to answer them. We have a short break now. I'll show the agenda for the time of 5 minutes. So grab a coffee, and we'll see you here in 5 minutes, and then we go to practice what we just saw. So I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Welcome back. I see most of us are still in the room. I hope you're all here to go to the next point of the agenda, which is the case with open data. And I would like to pass the floor to Leon to explain us a little bit more about the case.
Yes, thank you, Louisa, and thanks to all the speakers before the break. Some very interesting topics that were addressed. So I will definitely look into the material provided later. I hope everyone had a good break. I'm ready to get their hands dirty now because we've prepared a little case study for you to really put your data knowledge into practice. So if you scan the QR code on this slide, you will get to the case study. You have about 30 minutes to wrangle a little bit with the data as much as you like. And you can fill in the answers in a document that will be shared in the chat, I believe. Just a few pointers. Keep in mind, if you're stuck, please move on to the next question. Just see how far you can get. It's not no points are given, so feel free to wrangle a little bit as you like. And you can get creative. We've tried to not make any assumptions about your technical ability, so everything can be done in Excel. But if you want to use other tools, Python, R, whatever you like, please feel free to do so. And if you have any questions, please just post them in the chat, and we will try to answer them to the best of our ability. So yeah, you have 30 minutes, and please go ahead. I'm very curious to see what your answers will be.
And we will all be here just for you to answer your questions, so you can answer them in the chat or send us a message.
Yes. So I already see some questions coming in about where to get the data. That's actually part of the exercise. So before the break, Louisa showed you how to use the data portal a little bit. So please try to use data.europa.eu. And if you search for the topic that the case is about, then you should be able to find the related data set. Please also let us know if you still struggle with this subject.
Really nice to see more answers coming in and examples in the mural. I see some are struggling with updating the picture. Yes, copy and pasting the code is also possible. And let's see. In the mural, there's also a description on how to upload your picture. It's at the top of the mural. Given the time, I would like to ask you to all, well, finish and the right end with the case to how far you came, and hand in the exercise for the quiz. And I would like to ask the speakers of the workshop to also get back into the room, so we can go to the last part of this workshop, which is the Q&A and the wrap up of this exercise. Yes. Good to see you all here again. Leon, I don't know if you want to say anything about the case or end it or.
Yeah, just want to say that I see some very interesting answers. So that's nice to see that you all hope you had fun with this case. Yeah, and if there's anything you still would like to know about this, you can contact us after this session. Now
And I think one thing
go ahead.
maybe interesting to know, do you have tips from your side as the data science expert how you would handle such an assignment like this, how you would start?
Yeah, well, I see some people were a little bit struggling with retrieving the data. So it's good to know that if you follow the link that was shared in the chat before, you can download it from that page directly. So you don't have to go to the Eurostat page. But of course, if you go there, that's fine as well. And just in terms of the analysis, just start from the top. So try to get everything in order first, get a good grasp of the data, explore it a little bit before you really dive into answering questions. That always works for me to get a good grip on the structure of the data, and then after try to analyze it best you can. So I hope everyone was able to do that and had fun with this exercise. And like I said, please, if you want to know anything about this or the case, just reach out and we'll get back to you.
Yes, thank you. And the results of this this exercise will also be shared with the report out, which and the slides. So after this workshop, the report out will be shared with you as well within a week. Well, thank you. It's really good to see the answers coming in. So it's time for the last part of this workshop, and that's the question and answer. So for you to feel free to ask all your questions. I see for now there are no questions in the chat open, but well, maybe to start off with an interesting question, maybe to start for you, Leon, Leon van Wisse. What were for you the biggest challenges you faced when working with open data for your project? Oh, I see.
It helps that we are in charge of this data set ourselves. We are the owner, though we make use of infrastructure elsewhere. Don't mind the noise. Still, maybe not with this data set, but with other data sets, there's the idea that you cannot publish your data before you published about it. People are really sitting on their data. And it can be hard to request data from other parties in that way, or like we want to see request data from archives or musea, libraries that don't have the systems yet to publish this data, because we're very willing to link to them, also to the memory of the Netherlands in my presentation, but there's no nice way of obtaining the data interactively yet. I'm sure they're working on this, and it's very difficult with the partners that make their systems. But it would be very handy if all of these parties have such a linked open data endpoint for us to link to. But it's an ongoing thing in the Netherlands, and I'm sure in a few years we'll be there.
Yes, and how do you handle this then for your project? How did you handle it?
In case there's no such endpoint, or not even a way to obtain the data through a data portal. The way what we did with the posters was scraping the website. And for research, maybe that's possible, though maybe a bit tricky when we want to publish about it. We're not working with sensitive data. We're not working with person data most often in the humanities. So that's easy on my side.
Yes. And maybe for the others, Maria, what were for you the biggest challenges?
It was understanding the models used to formalize data, because providers always use different type of models, and if you want to merge data from different sources, then you have to deal with different models, and this is quite challenging in general, because that there are the information that you are looking for, but then if you don't understand the models, you cannot put everything together and you cannot recall this information. So this is quite important.
Yes. And how did you handle this for let's say Maggie?
It was like a long research about the models and a way of mapping these models, and also because we have the European data model, and then we have the CDOC conceptual reference model, And so these are two different ways of formalizing basically the same data, and you have to find a way to mapping and align these models. So that's the way. You have to know your data very, very well.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And I see for you, Maria, there was one question in the chat open. I'm not sure if it was answered, which was from a person who would like to know which kind of archaeological text you analyze.
Oh, okay. There was just the description that we found in the archaeological collection from Europeana. So it was not a specific type of archaeological text like a grill literature, but it was just a description of archaeological items. So we select the data using the Sparkle endpoint and the API from Europeana, and we select the archaeological items in the collection. That was.
All right. Yes. Thank you. And Diewertje, maybe for you also the question then, what are, according to you, the biggest challenges working with open data?
I think as sort of the institution speaking, our biggest challenge is actually convincing our researcher to make their data open. They're often quite cautious in it, which is completely understandable. But at the same time, you want to make as much of the data open as possible. And one of the things, for example, that we're currently facing is that because we offer a lot of licensing options, they tend to go with the most restrictive one just out of caution instead of making it an open license. So yeah, that's kind of where our struggles are from the institution's perspective. We want to have
Yes.
as much of our data open, but the researcher at the end of the day needs to actually do it.
Yes. And how do you handle this, or are you in close contact with them, or?
Yeah, we try to do a lot of training sessions, and we offer that we come by for conversations, and we do a lot of calls. But I think it's an issue of being a bit more of a large university or institution, because we notice it from our fellow institutions that are a bit smaller. They are really successful at reaching the researchers. For us, that's a pretty big challenge because they're all over the place and very busy people as well. So yeah, that's just a general issue that we see as not fixable within a year. It's going to be a long-term process to sort of
Yes.
create awareness and get people to do the sort of hopefully future normal thing when it comes to sharing data.
Yes. Do the others also acknowledge this? Anyone wants to say something about this? Yes, I see nodding. I think it's a recognizable thing. I see there's a question in the chat. What makes the difference between institutional data repositories and domain-specific data repositories? Maybe Diewertje, you can answer this one.
Yeah, so they're both sort of very specific repositories that have a limited types of data set. With an institutional data repository, the limitation is only researchers within the institution can publish on the platform, but everyone can access it. And for domain-specific repositories, the limitation is that the dataset needs to relate to the domain that the repository is related to. So an example is our institutional repository is open for all domains that are practiced at the university, so all domains. While EGA, which is the European Genome, I always forget what it stands for, but it's in genomics and such, is only available for uploads of genomics data. So that's hopefully a bit clearer what the difference is between the two.
Yes, I hope this answers the question, indeed. Maybe another interesting question for you, Maria. What advice would you give to students or academics looking for specific data sets for their research?
I don't know. I mean, there are of course some the data.europa that can be used for finding the data sets, but you also have to check for repos on GitHub, for example, because in some cases, these data sets are not shared in a specific app, but they are just hosted on GitHub or other repos like this. So I don't know. I mean, it's really a process that you have to,
Yes.
to
go through. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I see another question in the chat is how about limiting containing the predatory publishers? This one is, can you answer it or maybe Diewertje?
I can give it a try. I think it relates to the fact that when you publish in certain journals, they sometimes ask to publish the data within the repository of the journal. We often advise our researchers not to do it if it's not absolutely necessary. It's better to use an open repository to avoid that the publishers and the sort of predatory publishers become the new owner of your data, which would possibly even limit your reuse of your data. It's one of those things, we often advise it, but we also realize it's not really possible. That whenever you use a repository or a platform to publish data or articles or whatever, try to read the terms of use, because sometimes there will be some information in there that will actually say everything that is published on our platform becomes our ownership, and you're not allowed to do anything with the data, not even store it anymore. And that kind of information is really important to know. So that's why it's best to sort of try not to upload your data to the publisher's repository, because typically they will have stipulations like that in there, while other platforms like an institutional repository, of course, that's a very safe option because everything is within the university. But you can also have a Zenodo, which is very much aimed at that openness where you don't have those kind of stipulations. So I would say read terms of use, but I also realize that that's not a very easy thing to always do. But that's sort of where it comes to data. The landscape is such that you don't have to publish it in the data repository of the publisher. So I would advise to not do it if you can avoid it.
Yes, thank you.
What you see in academia is that we still have to make use of these publishers for the paper, but maybe also for the data. But maybe you can deposit a preprint somewhere out in the internet. That's exactly the same as the thing you submitted to the journal. And maybe you can do the same with your data indeed on Zenodo. And just put a CC BY license on it, and at least you're cited. We hope.
Yes. And Leo, maybe for you also as a question, do you have any advice? What advice would you give to the students who want to work with open data?
There's a lot out there, but maybe not in the right format, or maybe not that accessible. Indeed, I can adhere to the modeling issue, getting a grip on a model, even if it's in an ontology well described. There's a lot of interpretation still there among data sets. How to interpret the definition of person, that's varying widely across data sets. From my experience, I can only say, if I take it back to my cinema context, we are very welcoming people to use our data. And if it's suitable for our data sets, we want to ingest new data as well. So maybe if you build interpretation on top of us, then we should give it a place as well, like this separate data sets on posters. So maybe teaming up with your university data department or some others that are in charge of a data set that can easily ingest new findings that you have on this data. And if not, publish your data out, link back to the original source. And that way we can grow this network of interconnected data sets. But for sure, the university has people that can assist you in your writing code or obtaining the data, modeling a bit. The data stewards, but then for students.
Yes, thank you. And I see a new question in regards to the terms of use. Is it possible to just to search for specific keywords, such as owner?
Yeah, I think their suggestion makes absolute sense. It's what I do as well. I open the terms of use and I do a control find on ownership, rights retention, that kind of stuff. That can often make it a bit easier to go through that.
All right, thank you. And for you, Dewich, as well, the question, and what advice do you have for students who want to work with open data?
I would, if you've never done it before, really take the time to first get to know the landscape a bit so that you're aware of all the data that's out there, because I think that might be one of the biggest challenges. So have a look around in all these different aggregators like Data.europa, like OpenAir, even Google Dataset Search. You have so many options out there, and try to just have fun and look around what's out there. And then once you're a bit aware of the landscape, you can very pointedly look at the one thing that you're looking for. Because I know that when I started at my job, I found that one of the most overwhelming issues of there's so much out there, but you kind of need to take the time to get to know everything and then start searching. But I think those aggregators like Data.europa, OpenAir, dataset search from Google are all really good starting points.
Thank you. Yes, really useful. I see no more questions asked in the chat. Any of you wants to share something or has any additions? Let's see. No. Then I think we can move on, well, quite on time actually, to go to the feedback form. I would like to ask you to take a few minutes to give us feedback. It will be really useful for us because this is actually the first more workshop focusing on how to use open data for your research. And maybe for future workshops, we could implement the feedback as well. So we really appreciate your feedback. So this QR code leads to the feedback form. And in chat, the link to the feedback form is also shared. So I hope you've had time to fill in the form or otherwise fill it in after. Oh, I think the link. Oh, no, indeed, this is the link to the workshop. Let me quickly go to the right link. Yes, indeed. Let me check where the feedback form is. Yes, the last one is shared now. So if you can open this one, this will be the correct one to the feedback form. I'll give you some time. And first of all, to conclude also this session, I saw a lot of questions in the beginning coming up of how to find specific data sets on data.europa.eu. A link was shared to the contact form. Feel free to ask your questions there as well. Then we can help you with finding a specific data sets or giving you more an explanation. Or if you want to give us feedback about a data set that you used or that you couldn't find on the portal, feel free to also use the contact form. So that's about the workshop. Then I would like to thank, first of all the speakers that are here. Thank you for your very interesting stories and presentations and examples, and taking the time to tell us more about it. I hope, well, the others, just as I, learned a lot about what you did. So I really want to thank you for that as well. The slides will be shared afterwards, just as like the recording. and the answers to the exercise. We will share it with you later with an email providing you all the information. This will also lead you to our academy where the slides will be added. And indeed also the responses to the questionnaire. So all the information will be shared via email. So thanks for all. Then I want to highlight to you, stay up to date to our next activities because we keep on organizing webinars and workshop. So our next webinar is, well, actually within 2 weeks. It's on the Open Data Maturity Report, the report I mentioned at the beginning of this workshop. So if you want to learn more about it, feel free to join this session where we'll tell you all about the impact dimension. And on our website, you can find more information in our newsletter, but also follow us on social media and stay up to date on all the activities that we do. And for now, I want to thank everybody for joining and for being here today.